Campaign in Philadelphia on Saturday.
And his campaign ad makes a powerful statement about you-know-who. Take a look.
Images of white supremacists marching in Charlottesville, framing his vision of what's at stake in this election.
This is not who we are. This is not who we are. And I absolutely refuse to accept the notion that that's who we have to be.
President Trump took note of Biden's announcement today. Mr. Trump tweeted, quote, "Welcome to the race, Sleepy Joe."
Our politics has become so mean, so petty, so negative, so partisan, so angry. And our president is the divider in chief.
Oh, yeah!
The single most important thing we have to accomplish is defeat Donald Trump.
After Charlottesville, I said that I believe that we're in a battle for the soul of America. I say it again today, we're in the battle for the soul of America.
We also have to rebuild the backbone of this country, the middle class, and this time bring everybody along. Because Wall Street did not build America. You build America. You build America. And unions built the middle class.
Everyone knows who Donald Trump is. We have to show people who we are. We choose unity over division. We choose science over fiction. We choose truth over lies. I'm not backing down. I'm not going to be distracted by his lies, his fears, his extortion, his name calling. I'm going to stay focused on your lives. And I mean this from the bottom of my heart, on your lives.
Let's go, Joe! 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 Let's go, Joe!
Tonight, the first votes in the 2020 Democratic presidential primary.
Joe Biden's trying to bounce back after what he calls a gut punch from what appears to be a fourth-place finish in the Iowa caucuses.
ABC News projects that Senator Bernie Sanders will win the New Hampshire primary.
We just heard from the first 2 of 50 states. 2 of them. Now, where I come from, that's the opening bell.
Early voting is already underway in Nevada.
Coming in second with his best early state finish yet, Joe Biden hoping for a bit of momentum of his own in the next contest.
We know Joe, but most importantly, Joe knows us.
CNN projects that Joe Biden is the winner in South Carolina.
All those who've been knocked down, counted out, left behind, this is your campaign.
And right on the heels of the South Carolina primary, Super Tuesday, 14 states will hold primaries.
We need a politics that's about decency, a politics that brings back dignity.
And in Joe Biden, we have someone who, in fact, is the antithesis of Donald Trump.
And that is why I am endorsing Joe Biden for president.
And it was certainly a Super Tuesday for Joe Biden. No question about that. He rode a fast-breaking wave to score a primary comeback beyond any that has come before.
I really believe we're creating a moment. And we're doing this by bringing together America's very race, ethnicity, gender, and economic station.
Biden has essentially sealed the nomination.
Let me start by saying the obvious. These aren't normal times. This crisis has reminded us that government matters.
And I know we share the understanding. We've got to go forward right now and out of this in an unprecedented way.
And we have seen the importance of having a leader that we can count on in a crisis. It's not Donald Trump, it is Joe Biden.
And that's why I'm so proud to endorse Joe Biden for President of the United States.
These days, I think a lot about the words written by the philosopher Kierkegaard. He said, faith sees best in the dark. And the Lord knows these days are dark days in this nation and across the world. This virus is tough, but America's tougher. The American story is a story of ordinary people doing extraordinary things given half a chance. We're seeing this all around us. Courage, strength, selflessness, resilience. I know we'll get through this and we'll be stronger for it. I promise you.
go, Joe! Let's go, Joe! Let's go, Joe! Let's go, Joe!
Who are we? We're the ones who step up for each other. I've got your back. You've got mine. Kindness, humility, empathy. It's not just talk. It's who we are. It's who we always have been. And no one can take that from us. The movement to bring it back, it started here. And here. And here. In school gymnasiums, community centers, the living room down the block. You'll be where? Okay, we'll be there. Who are we? We're the movement that will beat Donald Trump. Welcome. We're going to have to sweat for it. We're going to have to sacrifice and fight. We're going to have to lead. Everyone is going to have to lead with kindness, humility, empathy, and not just talk, but action. Action today, action tomorrow. Action until we win. And we will win if we do this together. It's who we are. It's who we always have been. Now let's show them.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. We're just going to get started momentarily. Thank you so much for your patience.
Hi, everyone. My name is Steph Spears, and we'll get started right now. I am a alumni of the Obama and Biden administration, as well as the campaign. And right now, I run a community solar company in Boston called Solstice. At Solstice, we connect households and businesses to community solar farms in their area, putting clean energy savings in their hands for sometimes the first time. And we pay special attention to underserved communities in our work. I'm really proud to be co-hosting alongside the Clean Energy for Biden New England group, who worked really hard to organize this event, alongside teammates from the Connecticut chapter and other members of our host committee. So thank you, everyone, for all the work you put into this. Yesterday, on the front page of the New York Times, after analyzing CDC data for 1.5 million coronavirus cases, the Times found that Black and Latinx populations are definitively and disproportionately affected by coronavirus in every geography in the country and every single age group. And COVID has exposed this yawning gap between the haves and the haves not in this country in every aspect of all of our lives. And we know from working in this industry that the inequity extends to climate and energy as well. So it's been quantifiably proven that if you're Black or brown in America, that means you're disproportionately low income. It means that you're disproportionately paying more for energy. It means you're disproportionately suffering from air pollution. It means you're disproportionately bearing the effects of climate change. And still, yet, it means you're disproportionately locked out of clean energy. And we often get told by people within our work in clean energy that, I'll think about equity later because I'm working on getting rid of carbon emissions by the gigaton. And that is hard enough. And yes, clean energy, getting that to 100% is really, really difficult. But a clean energy transition without equity is actually a little bit short-sighted because 40% of our country are people of color. 42% of our country are low to moderate income. And so very simply put, if we have any hope of mitigating climate change and getting to 100% renewable or clean energy, then we have to democratize access to clean energy. So Joe Biden has worked to address economic inequality his whole career, and his roots in climate change actually go way back. He introduced one of the first ever climate bills in the Senate in 1986, and he helped us seal the Paris Climate Accord. Over the last few years, we've lost a lot of ground in the climate fight. And the good news is from day one of his administration, Joe Biden has committed to making climate a huge priority in his legislative agenda. Our clean energy future is going to require us to be more inclusive. And it's going to require us to reform systems in big and small ways with deliberate intention, and even when it is inconvenient for us to do so. Our guest tonight has a history of doing the right thing, even when it was inconvenient to do so. He, as a mayor of South Bend, Indiana, he started a sustainability committee, and he got the city to adhere to Paris Treaty commitments, even when our federal government was attempting to back out of it. Mayor Pete talks about how climate change is not just an environmental call to action. He talks about how the fight about climate change is really about our national security. It's about our economy. It's about our health. And he knows that justice has to be the common thread that connects all of our efforts across all of these industries if we have any hope of fixing the problems that currently ail us. So I'll kick it over to Mayor Pete. Thank you so much for your service, and thank you so much for being here with us.
Well, thank you, Steph. Thank you to everybody who has brought this event together because it is so critically important. And thank you for connecting the issue of racial justice and the disparate impact of this pandemic to the issues that are at stake in confronting climate. Because you're right, this is not an abstract or elite or academic concern. This is a matter of fairness. It is a matter of equality. It is absolutely inseparable from questions of racial justice in this country. And it's a matter of unbelievable urgency at a moment when we're not too late, but we're getting close. And it's one of the reasons why it was so important for us in the course of my presidential campaign to embrace and advance bold ideas on how to confront the climate challenge. And it's why one of the reasons why I'm so enthusiastically backing Joe Biden and so thankful that all of you in Clean Energy for Biden are doing that, and so glad to team up with you. For me, this is an issue whose face I saw again and again right here in South Bend, a largely low income and a community and a place where I remember feeling that climate change was upon us as we started to experience once in a millennium weather events, extreme weather events on an almost annual basis. I remember standing on the porch of a family home in a part of the West Side, a historically Black neighborhood in our city, trying to think of an answer for a mother asking what she's supposed to do with her 4 kids as their possessions were literally floating by. And seeing that this, not just stock footage of ice shelves calving off the Antarctic, is the real face of climate change. And we have a chance to do something about it. And in Joe Biden, we have somebody who, Steph mentioned, I won't tell you how old I was in 1986, but let's just say he was working this issue before it was cool. And that has extended from the 1980s all the way through to his work on the Paris Climate Accord, and campaign vision that will act immediately and deliver concrete results in those first 100 days to ensure that our country is on the right track. And as we do it, I think create the opportunity to restore or help restore our credibility around the world, something that is in such disrepair. And yet, America remains an indispensable nation when it comes to confronting this climate challenge. It just won't be solved without us, and we won't solve it alone. It is as live a call to American global leadership as we've seen, other than perhaps the pandemic itself. And we know, of course, why we need different leadership in order to manage that. So I'm so thrilled to be in this conversation with some of the most effective and powerful advocates, people who through the various initiatives that you were part of have been doing, not just talking about the work that needs to happen, connecting it up to job creation, delivering that better, greener economy that we know demonstrates why there's not a false choice for us to fall into, but rather a smart choice for us to look ahead to when it comes to economic growth. It can't happen unless we tackle the climate challenge in the same way that we will not have a strong economy unless we confront the health challenge that is in front of us. As entrepreneurs, as activists, as voters, as citizens, as veterans, and as contributors, as generous contributors to this cause, you have done that. So I'm so glad. I'm only sorry that we're not in the room together, but really looking forward to this conversation to hear about what you're working on and share thoughts on what it is that we can do and why it's so important that we get this right. I'll leave you by way of opening just with something that I often said on the campaign trail that I still think is true, which is if the IPCC warns us that the deadline for a number of major changes to be complete is 2030, that means the real deadline is 2020. The deadline is now, and we're 4 months away from it. And the last 4 months have reminded us in the bluntest possible terms just how much can happen in a country and how much can change in our politics in that span of time. So if you're seeing encouraging numbers, I'm encouraged too, but we cannot get comfortable or complacent just because there's a political tailwind kicking up as people around the country see the need for change. We have got to be applying our energy, our time, our talent, and our treasure toward making sure that we retake the White House and other offices up and down the ticket. And I know you're committed to doing that, and glad to be in the fight with you.
Thank you so much, Pete, for that. And it's so wonderful to see many friends, a lot of supporters from around New England and far beyond here on this call tonight. About 200 folks joined in just the last 5 days. So thank you to everyone, and thank you so much, Mayor Pete, for sharing those words and being part of this conversation as one of the most outspoken surrogates for the vice president. And we trust the next president. I'm excited to pose a couple of questions. We had quite a few that were submitted in advance, and one of your gifts we know is brevity, while also going into the real issues. So we'll see how many we can get through. By way of just a real quick introduction, my name is Dan Weeks. I'm a director at Revision Energy, an employee-owned solar company and certified B Corporation that, like Steph at Solstice, is working hard to help lead the clean energy transition in this part of the country. And I'm proud to be part of the New England Clean Energy for Biden group, which together with our friends at the Connecticut chapter was excited to help pull this off with our other co-hosts tonight. So let's dive right into the questions, Mayor Pete. The first, you covered a lot of ground at a high level. Maybe you can give us a few more specifics because you're in regular touch with the vice president and his team. What would the Biden administration do in those first 100 days to take bold action on the climate challenge?
Yeah, well, and I will try to be brief, and I'll ask you all to bear with me if you hear some interventions from Buddy and Truman. I'm home alone at the moment, and decided they'd be probably more agreeable in the room than out of it, but they might decide to weigh in. So look, there's first of all, of course, we know we got to reverse some harms right away. And Joe Biden has made it very clear that he will use the same power of the pen, the executive orders, that this president has used to unravel so many important environmental regulations that, by the way, also have the broad support of the American people, whether we're talking about clean air, whether we're talking about clean water, but also with a view toward climate. And of course, the fuel economy rules are maybe the best example of this. 12 billion barrels of oil were saved by the Obama administration's fuel economy rules. And crucially, and I know there are people on this call that can speak to this, and Dan, in your experience, you can speak to this. These were exactly the kinds of things that stimulated the kind of economic growth and business innovation and job creation that also allows us to break that false choice between doing the right thing for climate and growing economically. There's also a lot of power in the federal procurement system. Again, under the right administration, this is incredibly powerful. I remember visiting the Secretary of the Navy's office in the Pentagon, Ray Mavis, who in the Obama-Biden administration was enthusiastic about making sure that the Navy was doing the right thing. It's just one of the biggest purchasers of fuel in the country. When the federal government spends $500 billion a year, if that procurement is oriented toward climate progress, which it can be, again, in many cases, just through executive and administrative action, that is unbelievably powerful because it moves markets and it makes things possible that wouldn't be otherwise. Then there's the fact that, of course, this can't just be done administratively or with executive action. There's got to be legislation. And it's why we're working so hard in other circles to ensure that we have a good and effective Congress that acknowledges climate reality. The Biden campaign has been very clear, building, by the way, on a House plan that we see now that I think is really encouraging. That legislation to create a 100% clean economy will be a priority launched in the first 100 days. And I think in many ways, we're going to be responsible for being as energetic in pushing that legislation once Vice President Biden is in office as president, as we are in making sure we win the election. This legislation, he has pledged, will include record amounts of research and innovation funding. It just doesn't happen from the private sector alone. There has to be leadership, especially in that research that is so essential in order to then allow the private sector to pick up the ball and run with it. So these are some of the concrete things that we know can be done. I'll just mention one other because it's so close to a mayor's heart, which is infrastructure. Infrastructure week just passed by again. It has become a national punchline. We need to rebuild infrastructure anyway as a country, but doing it with a view toward climate resilience and transforming our economy. That's the opportunity we have. And the other side of the coin, the silver lining on the neglect that's happened up until now.
Thanks so much. And I think we got an enthusiastic bark in favor of all that you shared. But it's terrific to hear that these aren't just commitments at a high level, but there's a lot of meat on the bones that we're already seeing. And I would, on the side note, recommend, if folks haven't seen the recent report out of the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis in Congress just out in the last few days, check that out. We've got some exciting stuff to rally around. The next question came from Brian Garcia in Connecticut, and I just got to mention, he's actually the CEO of the nation's first green bank. Connecticut's led the way there, and so no surprise, a question about how we can kind of scale that nationally. So he notes your climate plan as presidential candidate was based on the principles of the Green New Deal. And last week, the House passed this $1.5 trillion Invest in America Act to modernize and decarbonize the nation's infrastructure, which included the creation of a national green bank, as your plan also included. Could you speak a bit about the importance of how we confront change, specifically as it applies to vulnerable communities and environmental justice issues, which you and Steph have already spoken to, as well as providing workforce development opportunities, a just transition, livable wages? You get it all, the foundational principles of the Green New Deal. How can we accomplish that through a green bank nationally or otherwise?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Brian, because it's central, and it's one of many cases where the House is showing that it can be done. They have created a template that demonstrates what these policies look like. We don't have to talk about them just in the abstract. And what we've seen is that the way it's done with things like a national clean bank can make it possible to gather the resources needed, the market-making work that federal intervention can do, that unlocks the power of the private sector instead of pitting business against those communities with the most to lose from climate change. This is also what we have to do with respect to workers. Look, we've got, I worry sometimes that when we talk about green jobs, we miss in our vocabulary a chance to evoke what a lot of those jobs look like, which is union carpenters and electrical workers. Some of these are not mysterious or newfangled jobs. They're the exact kind that would be at risk as we transition away from a fossil economy, except that we need as many and more in many of these, calling for many of these same skill sets if we have the right kind of funding for transition, which is very much part of this vision, that will make sure that the very workers who might be vulnerable because of these changes are on the winning side of that. We've got to make sure that whether it's promoting the ownership of clean business ventures by minority small business leaders, or whether it's making sure that the investment goes into those neighborhoods and communities that have been on the wrong end of so many of these environmental justice concerns, that we're acting with intention on that. And one really compelling example I've seen on this is the idea around something that amounts to a version of the Green New Deal focused on public housing, where again, we know, as with our infrastructure, that there's a burning need to make a number of changes anyway, but in doing so can make markets for different kinds of technologies and approaches and reduce the cost to those who are most vulnerable to begin with. We know the families in America that pay disproportionate share of their income on things like utility bills are those who have the most to gain from us being a more energy efficient country and for us supporting quick development of lower cost renewable energy sources too. In the end, we can even envision for many people a household level energy independence, where we usually just talk about energy independence as a national priority. And in that, take some of the pressure off our transmission and distribution infrastructure, which we also know is dated and needs to be upgraded in ways that are compatible with America's energy future. All of these things fit together, and we need to think about the perspective of workers, of communities that have been neglected, of those who are going to face the most challenge and change, and that future generation that will be holding ours accountable for what we did during this short window when it was still within our power to do something, but a window that is closing quickly on us.
Thank you so much for that. And just on that point of workers, we know with 30 million unemployed Americans, many more even dropping out of the workforce, we certainly need those jobs, and the opportunity to add millions of many oftentimes unionized jobs in this economy is very exciting. Another part of that is, of course, taking down some of the barriers to the rapid scaling up of clean energy. And a question here from Nathaniel Raymond in Mass, and maybe linked to it, a great one that just came in from Sue Kaplan in New Hampshire online around, first of all, national standardization of the utility interconnection process. I can speak personally, our company, which has installed around 10,000 clean energy systems, has had 10,000 often unique interconnection processes we've had to follow. What's being done? What's the Vice President thinking about, removing some of these barriers? And then the related question that just came in is around transmission, another big utility challenge to ensure that we've got the basic infrastructure, the backbone of a grid that can accommodate the amount of incoming renewable generation.
Yeah, I mean, here again is an issue where I think we might look to the pandemic response as kind of a template. So we needed a national testing strategy, a real one. It didn't mean having everything kind of controlled or dictated or handled by the federal government, but what we needed was for federal leadership to call the tune. And often the right kind of standard setting is what makes it possible for our multifaceted system to actually be at its best, and for private enterprise to be at its best. But you still need to have that level of standards, and great federal successes like the invention of the internet, and great federal failures like where we are with respect to the pandemic really bear that out. And I think we have an opportunity to learn. Sorry, buddy has now dismantled part of my window. Lesson learned. So, when I was working on renewable energy in my kind of prior life as a consultant, one of the things that I think most Americans don't understand is this crazy patchwork that we have, right, of utility standards, building codes, and as you're talking about the interconnection process too. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing that we have a lot of different generation, transmission, and distribution utilities. What matters is that their work is harmonized in some way. And this is something that should be non-controversial, technocratic to the point of being boring, work that goes on in whether it's FERC or other parts of the federal administration, but it only works if you have people in charge of it who actually think this matters. and who are more concerned with unlocking the potential of the private sector to create more opportunity here than they are with protecting the legacy industry's ability to resist innovation, which is really what's going on. And as they do that, they're extracting a kind of invisible tax from the rest of us. This is, I know, something that the vice president is committed to. And when he talks, one of the things I really appreciate about his campaign is he doesn't just talk about what he personally would do in the Oval Office. He talks about creating a team. He talks about envisioning his administration as providing a lot of transition in our country. And I know that he will put in leadership much more knowledgeable than I am or than he is in the relevant areas to ensure that those kinds of processes take place. And the same thing when we talk about transmission, right? It doesn't necessarily have to completely be done by the federal government, although I actually think this is one area where we probably could take on more kind of direct federal handling of the investment. But there are so many municipalities that would benefit from access to a different kind of grid, and sometimes that are really exciting, cutting edge stuff we don't even get to think about because there won't be a market for it unless there's some kind of federal leadership in R&D. Whether we're talking about different transmission approaches, even the potential around DC, whether we're talking about some of the more distributed approaches around not just energy generation, but energy storage. The potential is huge. And we could be leading the way on this. We have to be leading the way on this if we want to advance as a country.
Thanks so much, Pete. My background got very black, so I'm throwing up a picture of one of our favorite community solar farms that actually powers a mobile home community in Lebanon, New Hampshire.
That's great.
We my shoulder there. You were, I had a lot of supporters up there. I think Mayor Sue Prentice is on as well tonight. Another question related to kind of energy infrastructure that just came in from a state senator who's with us and a champion of clean energy out of New Hampshire, David Waters, is around offshore wind. Any quick comments on what the VP will do? We know the capacity is enormous, the demand is right there along the coastlines. What are you sensing from the Vice President?
Well, I know what you won't see is him declaring that wind energy causes cancer or trafficking in some of these absurdities that make it very difficult to have a mature conversation. And look, there are a lot of important overlapping and sometimes contradictory concerns that are legitimate when it comes to the way that we're going to develop wind power. Sorry, I'm learning an important lesson about dog canine management here. I think what we're going to see is that those issues will be handled with a level of prioritization of climate concerns and a level of engagement and listening. I'll also tell you, as a mayor, having engaged with the EPA, for example, and dealing with presidential appointees in posts of that regional level. I'm getting a bit technical here, and this is deeply unsexy stuff, but there have been times where you got municipalities and states, and then you got the DC administration of the EPA, and then you got the regions just out there kind of in a different place than everywhere else. And I know that can happen across other agencies, whether we're talking about HHS or HUD or the Department of Energy. So it's going to be really important, and I think this is a real commitment of the Vice President to engage with the local through appointees, not just the presidential appointees you're going to see getting confirmed by the Senate at the cabinet level, but in that kind of mid-level who have a demonstrated track record of engaging with the people on the ground, the stakeholders who have the most to say about this, and then fitting that to the federally stated priorities that have to do with our national climate goal.
Thanks for that, Pete. And while I don't think all 200 of us followed everything that you said, I think there's probably a common sigh of relief that that you've really grappled with these issues, as has the entire Vice President's team. So cheers for that. I want to shift gears a little back. This was another question submitted in advance from Lizanne Rosenstein in New York. And you touched on this, and Steph touched on this powerfully in her intro. In light of the recent focus on the most urgent issues that we're facing as a country now, racial discrimination against all people of color, the fight for gender equity, and of course the pandemic, how do we make climate change exciting, compelling, something that voters want to really get out and fight for in these next 4 months? We know that what we must fight for, ending systemic racism, that part of that is supporting healthcare workers as they battle with this virus. But we also need, as you noted before, this slow-moving crisis, reversing climate change, which seems in this moment to have lost a sense of urgency. Thoughts on how we can excite and engage folks' emotions around this issue?
I mean, to me, it's about making it personal. You know, as you know, a big principle of my whole campaign was that everything about politics is personal. We just don't always see it that way. And you know, as somebody whose hometown and community and marriage were shaped by decisions made in Washington, I think it's really important for us to express in those terms what is at stake in these political decisions. I also think that part of what's really changing the answer and making this more visceral is the moral authority of young people who are very much standing up for their own lives when they elevate the importance of these issues. And you know, sometimes it's intense. Sometimes they get in my grill, but that was a healthy thing when activists, and I can't believe I'm old enough to say this, but activists from a younger generation speaking about just how important a sense of urgency is for their own life chances, right? I mean, this is obviously going to affect our generation's future, but the generation to come really, I think, will experience on a make or break basis decisions made just before they were old enough to have their hands on the pulleys and levers of power. And so the extent to which they have mobilized in a democratic process, in the advocacy that has, you know, the most visible climate activist globally, a Swedish teenager who, if she were a US citizen, would not yet be old enough to vote. I think it shows you that this, as it was in changing the conversation on guns, and as it has been to some extent a big part of the, I think, moral authority of the movement for Black Lives, that insistence of a newer generation on better decision making is something that all of us who are in and around the more political side of the process should continue to respond to harness, to engage, and lift up.
Thank you. We know this is a moral issue, as you've said. There's so many great questions here. We do have time for a few more. I'd love to shift gears from domestic to the international scene. That's something you talked about a lot in your campaign. A question that Stephanie Burns just posted here. You know, the importance of the United States role in the world. You're very familiar with this. You've served abroad as a naval intelligence officer. Can you expand on this, and specifically how we reclaim leadership on global climate diplomacy before it's too late?
Yeah, I think this is one of the main ways that the world will take our measure and determine whether the Trump moment is a reason to just plan on not counting on America anymore, or whether it was something that we will recover from and put decidedly in our past. Look, we're about 15% of global emissions, so we can't do it alone. We're the world's biggest economy. The world can't do it without us. That is the recipe for global engagement that calls the United States back into a leadership position that I think we need to be ready to take up more than ever. We've got a lot of work to do just to build trust, I think, around the world. And one of the best ways to do it is through action. So to see us walking the walk, to see us, first of all, here at home, as again, these first 100-day initiatives that the vice president's talked about will set the tone for right here in the United States, I think then authenticates what we've got to do abroad, which is to be leading in a way that is corroborated by what people see us doing right here, but also gives us a little more moral authority to have China, for example, not on the front foot, but explaining what they're going to be doing to be part of the solution. And by the way, mobilizing resources to help what is sometimes called the global south respond when their carbon budgets, so to speak, are getting exhausted very quickly. Global climate diplomacy could be the backbone of a much more enlightened way of engaging countries that really can't escape our mutual interdependency. I mean, there's never been a better example of a positive sum situation than the need for global coordination on climate. It could create in humankind a habit of cooperation through necessity, not altruism, that might serve us well in some of the other challenges that we're undoubtedly going to face around the globe. So to me, there's an opportunity here. As terrifying as the threat side of it is, there's enormous opportunity. I know the world's looking for that. The world, our allies in particular, don't like seeing America the way that we've reduced ourselves to right now. And so, you know, there's still a lot of people rooting for America, but not just any America. It's got to be one that's actually stepping up. And in that, I see a tremendous opportunity. Speaking
of positive sum, and maybe coming back to the mainland now, something that you raised a lot on the trail was the need to, and the opportunity, frankly, to bring Americans who are maybe not in agreement with everyone on this call on a lot of political issues. Folks in flyover country, to use the derogatory phrase, where you live and led your city. Folks in ag in particular as real participants in solving this crisis. Can you expound a little bit more on that, and how will the VP bring in those crucial voters to ensure an electoral college win and then ensure the consensus that can actually solve this crisis once he's in office?
Look, we live in a season where common sense measures have become politicized. Right? I mean, the fact that a testing strategy was perceived in Congress as a concession to Democrats, the idea that wearing a mask is a statement of ideological fidelity rather than just something we all have to do, tells you what we've been reduced to. And again, I think that that's a pattern that applies to climate. But one of the things I saw on the campaign trail again and again, including campaigning in very rural and often very conservative areas, is that you don't have to contort yourself to have a conversation about why this is of concern to everybody. Look, rural America, especially agricultural America, has as much to lose as anyone and as much to contribute. One of the things I really enjoyed was talking with, for example, farmers in Iowa about the potential of soil management and how our country could stand up taller if we were leading the way in using different kinds of agricultural techniques as a strategy for carbon reduction, in the same way that we led the way 2 generations ago in greater food production through American agriculture. This doesn't have to be another red versus blue, right versus left issue. I know it's gotten to be one, but frankly, the only way long-term strategy for the Republicans, once they figure out how to cope with having been taken over by the Trump administration, is to pivot on climate. But we shouldn't be waiting for them to do that. We should be guiding voters who get it. And again, there's a new generation that abundantly gets it because it's personal for them. And it's just hard to trick people about their own lives and their own future, and engage that. I also think there's a chance to create a more positive feeling around all of this. Don't get me wrong, it's not about downplaying the threat, but it's about inviting people to stand up taller when they picture what it could be like if we actually got this right. And engaging in the spirit of kind of progressive patriotism, the potential that this country has to solve that problem, be proud that we did it, save a lot of lives while we're at it, and command greater respect around the world.
Big second to progressive patriotism here. Thanks for that. Can I apply that, just take that one step further, Pete? Something that I've had the pleasure of talking about with you since grad school days is, at a sort of person-to-person level, how can we, as we go about having our conversations with folks who may not share our political ideology, how can we find those bridges of common ground, whether it's specific to climate or more broad, because we've got to win the election, whatever folks' issues are. Can you speak a little bit about kind of uniting around first principles and helping move people down a journey away from this, fight mentality, toward a bit more of a sense of common cause to help win the election and the big fights ahead?
I think people are ready for it. I think there's a real opportunity here. And again, I think the vocabulary and the spirit of the Biden campaign, which, I mean, just look at the dueling 4th of July messages, right? It really illustrates how this can work. Look, we're only going to confront the climate challenge if it has the feeling of a shared national project. And I think that the election is the right time to begin setting that tone. This is a way of doing politics that I think Americans, definitely here, even in bright red Indiana, are ready for, because even if they are more conservative, there's also a sense of exhaustion. Doesn't mean that we can win a campaign just by saying the other guy's terrible, even though he is, and most people know it. We have to create a sense of what we're actually trying to build and have a chance to create. But I do think there's a greater chance for that than ever. I think about the way that the faces would rise and fall in those famous Trump-Obama counties, which were some of our best turf to campaign in, whether we were in New Hampshire or in the Midwest or other places. Some of those communities that don't necessarily buy into a kind of tribal understanding of politics, my team versus your team, really just want to know if they're being heard. And the really compelling thing about this that I found is you don't have to pretend to believe something you don't. You don't have to water down your values. You don't have to sacrifice your commitments. There just has to be as much listening as there is speaking, and there has to be a vocabulary that can call people together. And another thing that I found is very powerful and that again, I think the VP does very well, is speaking to faith. There are a lot of people who are guided by the implications of the moral teachings that they subscribe to on stewardship of the earth and on our responsibility to one another and to the vulnerable that are so clearly linked to the stakes of the climate challenge. And talking about that way can make people feel, as they inch toward our perspective, not like we're defeating them in an ideological battle, but that we're inviting them to be at our side in a shared moral cause.
Thanks, Pete. Maybe taking that just one step further, you've spent time around Vice President Biden. Most of us on this call have not. As you share person to person about what really compels you about him, and I know it's a lot more than just not Trump, is there an anecdote, an image, or something you can share with us that maybe we can take away and perhaps even pass on in our way to help move folks in our circles to support him ultimately?
I mean, I'll tell you, you get to know your competitors well in this process, right? And it really says something when you come to like and admire somebody while you're competing against each other. That doesn't always happen, but that did happen in the case of the VP. Seeing these moments in the debates in between, for example, not just the way he would talk to me, ask how I was doing, and be encouraging, but you'd turn around wondering, who was going where, and in the 3 minutes commercial break, and you'd see him talking with the people working the stage, all the technical crew, asking about their lives, and until somebody would grab him and tell him it was time to get back out there. There was a kind of energy there that I think is really really remarkable. And also, I think this real desire to find what's best in other people, and you could just see it again and again. He'd in these little moments talk about people that often talking about other people, somebody he just met or somebody he just talked to. That I think is exactly the kind of spirit we need after 4 years of president who could think of nobody but himself. The other thing I think about was this very moving moment when I decided to endorse him, and we did an event together in Texas, and he talked about his son, talked about losing Bo. And it's clear that those experiences that shaped his life, rather than motivating him to kind of withdraw into his own world, gave him a kind of a way to see into the hearts of other people, and to reach out, to motivate him to find others, especially when they were down and having a hard time. That is just so opposite from the spirit of what we have now emanating from the Oval Office, but also so suited to this moment. A moment where there was so much pain and division and anguish and loss, and there's going to be more loss in the months ahead. That wrestling with that and then coming out stronger, as Hemingway said, stronger in the broken places. That's exactly what he's best at, and it's something I got to see up close, and I think it's something we're all going to be glad to see in the White House.
Beautifully put. I know we're coming right up to the hour, so we're going to begin to wrap things up here. I wish we could have gotten to more questions. Thank you so much to everybody who submitted questions in real time and in advance. Apologies for veering a little bit off here, but I hope we took something away from this that we can use as we go out between now and November to help move this forward. I also just want to say how thrilled I am to see so many folks on this call, leaders in clean energy and climate. Thank you for doing the work day in and day out, both of actually making the transition happen and then making the policy change happen, which is on all of us as we move to the election. So let's say a big thank you, a big virtual applause here for Mayor Pete Buttigieg for being with us from South Bend, and the dogs. I'm sorry they didn't make an appearance. Some folks were wishing they had, but
here I'll
good to hear. Oh, there we go.
This is Buddy sitting on the curtain. He just managed to dislodge from the window and avidly patrolling the street below. So,
well, you've made all our night now, Mayor Pete, if your words weren't enough. But surely they were, and we're thrilled to know that you're out there helping to lead and get out the vote for Vice President Biden. Thank you for all you're doing and all that you brought as a candidate and a leader in our nation. So once again, thank you, Mayor Pete. And let's just turn it over to wrap up. Alexandra from the Biden campaign, just a few closing words.
Yeah, so I want to thank Mayor Pete as well for the rich discussion. I felt like we covered so much ground on this call. Thank you to Dan, thank you to Steph and our full host committee. Thank you everyone for your support of the Vice President's campaign. Please stay tuned for events from Clean Energy for Biden and other campaign events that we'll share with you over the upcoming weeks. And I hope you all have a nice evening, and thanks for joining us again.
Thank you again, and there will be more to come. So please stay in the loop and keep on Mayor Pete leading this charge.
Thanks everyone for being part of this. It couldn't be more important, and it's a treat to be reunited with so many of you.